Hi, thanks for joining me. We're going to talk about HTML and CSS. This course is designed for those who are just starting out. So if you're already familiar with how HTML and CSS work together, then you can just skip this one. So we're going to talk about the terminology first, and then how these two languages kind of communicate with one another. Okay, so an overview of what we're going to learn is HTML elements, HTML attributes, classes, and IDs. We're going to talk about display types, what's inline block element and what's a block level element. And we're also going to talk about what's called the division tag. It's short for div tag, and we will talk about containers as well. After that, we'll talk a little bit about CSS, and we'll talk about selectors, properties, and values. These are the three most important aspects of CSS, so let's get started. Up next, I would like to talk real quick about retaining information. We're going to talk a lot about terminology, and it's important to be able to understand what a developer is trying to communicate with you and vice versa. So I created this little meme here, and this is probably what's going to be happening to you in the next few lessons. You're going to want to keep going back and learning more. I understand that we're not actually going into the code in this video, but we will get into it on the next video. Alright, so we're going to jump into it, and we're going to talk about HTML elements and what they are and what their syntax is. And if you're unfamiliar with syntax, it is just the way that you display the text on screen. There's a certain way that you have to write your code in order for it to be valid. So here on the left we have elements. They're also called tags, and we have what are called heading tags here, and this is a greater than and a greater than and less than sign, and everything is always wrapped in those two signs. This would be considered the opening tag, and on the right here we have a closing tag. You'll notice that the closing tag has a / in it, and each one of these headings serves a different purpose, but they basically do the same thing. An example of this would be here on the right. We have headings. We have an H1, which matches with here, and H2, 3 and 4, 5, and 6. Each one of these has a separate font size. So basically this is going to be the kind of syntax that you're going to be working with a lot in HTML and other languages. So here we have a P tag, which is called paragraph tag, and that is just screen that's on the text. And then we have what's called an image tag and an anchor tag. The anchor tag is going to be something that might be confusing at first, because this is actually a link. So in between here, you might write the word Facebook, but in reality, it's going to shoot you off to https facebook.com. So we'll get into looking at the syntax of that as later on, because this also has what are called attributes with it. We'll talk more about attributes up next. Okay, so let's talk about attributes of an element and how we use them and why we use them and what they are used for. So a class attribute here, it starts with the word class and then as an equal sign, and then we put the class name in between quotes. We don't do anything with the closing tag here. That always stays the same. So here we have the word anything, and that literally means that you can create whatever name you want. This can be ASFD if you want it to be. And the reason that we have these is so that CSS and JavaScript can look at this element and say, okay, well, I understand that it's a paragraph, but if I want to select the paragraph, I'm also selecting every paragraph that's on the page. By adding a class name to this, you can style this specifically. So if I want to take this paragraph text and I want to turn it blue, I might write blue here, and then I'd write a CSS style to apply a blue text to this. The ID attribute is kind of the same thing. The only difference is that you can only have one ID attribute on your page with one name. So this can be anything that you want, just like the class name, but it can only be assigned to one element. Now you can have multiple IDs as long as the name is different. Okay, so another one is called the source attribute, and that goes on to images. There also be called script tags and link tags here as well that will have source attributes. And again, this is a little bit different, and we'll go over in a couple slides what this needs to be, but basically this is an image location that on your file system or on a URL. So if I want to load a cat image, I might go to Google, I might copy the image address, and I place that here, and that will actually load the image itself. Okay, next up we're going to talk about the div tag. This tag stands for division, but it's I like to think of it more as a divider. This creates a box around elements. So here we have a paragraph and some heading, and around that we have an entire div. So to kind of represent this a little better, I've created this here, and I know this seems like a lot of code, but it's really not. And what this is this is nesting divs. So we might have a container or wrapper. I believe a long time ago they called them wrappers, but they call them containers now more often. So the container is the first div that we have, and it actually ends all the way down here at the bottom. So it's wrapping all of these elements. And here we have another div, and this has an attribute of box1, and it's wrapping this image, this header and paragraph, and then it ends before we have box2, which wraps 3 more. And to kind of get a representation of this arrow here is talking about box1, which is here. This is actually box2, so ignore that. So box2 is here. The container will be the red area around both boxes. So the container is wrapping both boxes, and box 1 here is on the left, which is wrapping this content, the image, the header, and the paragraph. And box 2 is again wrapping the image, the header, and the paragraph. And then CSS is going to take care of separating these boxes into a 2-column layout. Okay, so we're finally ready to start talking about CSS. And to kind of get a representation of what CSS is, I have 2 images here from facebook.com, and this is before you log in. The website on the left here shows strictly just the HTML, and the CSS has been stripped out completely. And on the right is the same exact information, but with the CSS applied. So you can kind of see that CSS is extremely powerful, and you can tell here we have a container here, blue, and another container. So you can see how this can be laid out. If we go back, you're going to notice that we have box 1 and box 2. Well, it's kind of the same premise here, where we have box, box, and everything is a box when it comes to styling these elements. Let's talk about CSS properties and values. And I've kind of made some highlighting here to get you to get you the syntax for this. And remember, syntax is how we are forced to write our code. So you might recognize this here. This is an H2. So that would be a heading 2, and then we have a curly brace, which is an opening, and a closing curly brace. And in between the curly brace, we write our properties and our values. So in this case, we're setting the text color to red. Okay, so selectors, we kind of just talked about that. A selector here is going to be the element itself, but it's also going to be classes or IDs, and you can use source as well if you have a specific thing that you want to select. Just real quick, we have an example here of hello in a paragraph, and the CSS for that would be just to select P and color it red, and the results here on the right. So classes and ID, in order to select elements, we have special syntax that we have to use in order to select a class and ID. The syntax to select a class would be using a period first and followed by the class name. In this case, it's my class. And to select ID attributes, we want to use a number sign, or you can call that a hash sign if you want, and then the ID name. And in this instance, we're creating a font size of 16 pixels. And that's pretty much it as far as CSS goes. And I know that was kind of quick to go through CSS, but there's a lot to it, and I'd rather you just understand the name and syntax real quick of how you select classes and IDs, and the color coding here for selectors and properties and values. And there are a number of different properties and values that you can use to style these elements. So we don't really want to get into that. We just kind of want to understand the syntax so that later we can get more into it. So if you like this, please like and subscribe for more content. I will be making more videos on this. I think the next one is going to be basically just making an entire website from absolutely nothing. Okay, so thank you for watching.